She found the bobcat collapsed in the snow, barely alive, and beside it, a torn backpack with 3 newborn kittens inside. The mother stirred, locked eyes with the woman, and then did something no one expects from a wild animal on the edge. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air was crisp with the sharpness only deep winter could bring. Maggie's boots crunched through the crusted snow as she stepped off her porch, following the tracks that led up the ridge behind her cabin. The prints were scattered at first, erratic, like the creature had staggered or stumbled. She paused at the base of a pine, leaning on her walking stick, and scanned the slope above with a practiced gaze honed from decades of morning walks and nature watching. The forest beyond was silent. Too silent. Even the usual chatter of chickadees was absent, as though the woods themselves were holding their breath. She adjusted the strap on her binoculars, heart thudding with a strange blend of caution and urgency. That bobcat hadn't looked well. Its coat was dull, almost patchy, its limbs thin enough to show the ridges of muscle and bone beneath the fur. But what gripped Maggie wasn't just the animal's condition. It was that backpack. So out of place, so human. As if the wild and the civilized had collided and left this one surreal artifact behind. Maggie had lived alone since Tom passed, 10 years now, and in that time, she'd come to cherish the steady rhythm of solitude. But the sight of that struggling creature had pierced something in her. It wasn't just pity. It was a call. Something wordless and primal that said, "Help." She followed the trail with the care of someone who respected nature's boundaries, but wasn't afraid of them. The path curved around a frozen stream, where thin sheets of ice glittered in the morning sun like shards of glass. On the far bank, she found a smear of rust red across the snow. Blood. Dried but recent. Her breath caught. She crouched, fingers brushing the edge of the stain. A few tufts of fur were caught in the underbrush. Not much, but enough to make her stomach twist. The bobcat had been injured, maybe even attacked. Yet it had still dragged that pack like it meant something. Why? She rose slowly, eyes narrowing as the tracks veered deeper into the woods, toward the denser pines where the light thinned and the snow deepened. Maggie felt the cold bite into her legs, but she pressed on, driven less by logic and more by a quiet, mounting urgency. There was something in those woods, something that needed her. The forest pressed in tighter as Maggie moved forward, every breath a plume of mist in the morning air. The snow muffled her steps, but the hush of the woods carried its own weight, a silence so complete it bordered on reverent. Overhead, skeletal branches creaked in the cold, and frost clung to bark like forgotten lace. The bobcat's trail was unmistakable, deep, ragged impressions broken by occasional smears of red, where one paw dragged more than stepped. Each print seemed to echo with urgency, as if the creature had fought the land itself for every inch. Maggie's heart pounded louder than her footsteps. She wasn't a stranger to solitude, but this kind of stillness, the kind that made you aware of your own pulse, of the sound of fabric rubbing against itself, was different. It was the stillness of something waiting, watching. When she saw it again, her breath caught. The bobcat lay half-curled against a moss-slicked log, flanks rising and falling with slow, labored effort. Snow clung to its fur in clumps, and the backpack it clutched looked even more battered now, half buried in the powder. Yet the way it held it, tight, defiant, spoke of something more than instinct. Maggie didn't move right away. She stood there, staring, her mind warring between concern and awe. She had never seen a wild thing behave like this. No teeth bared, no low growl, just exhaustion. Just resolve. She took a cautious step forward. The bobcat's golden eyes met hers. No fear, no aggression, just a kind of grim endurance. Then, without warning, It let go. The backpack slumped into the snow with a dull thud. Maggie dropped to her knees, breath trembling. "It's okay," she whispered, not sure who she was reassuring, herself or the creature. "It's okay." The bobcat turned slowly and limped into the trees, each step slower than the last. She watched it vanish between the pines, swallowed by the cold. Only then did she turn to the pack. It was sun-bleached and crusted with old dirt, the canvas torn along one seam. She gripped the frozen zipper and tugged. The fabric resisted, then gave with a gritty rasp. The top opened. A sharp, musky warmth spilled into the air. Organic, unmistakably alive. She peered inside and gasped. 3 tiny shapes curled in the remnants of a torn flannel shirt. Fur barely more than fuzz. Eyes closed, ears folded. Newborn bobcat kittens. Her hand flew to her mouth. She understood now, and it broke her heart. The cold bit through Maggie's coat, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts raced, frantic and sharp, as she zipped the backpack halfway shut to protect the kittens from the wind, careful to leave space for air. They squirmed gently inside, blind and helpless, their tiny bodies radiating a fragile heat that felt like a secret flicker of life in the vast, indifferent wilderness. The faint, mewling cry of the one who'd opened its eyes still rang in her ears. Not a sound of strength, but of need. A sound that demanded something more than pity. Maggie had no children of her own. She and Tom had tried once, long ago, but life had chosen a quieter path for them. That path had eventually led her here, to this old cabin by the ridge, to long winters and bird song and mornings with coffee on the porch. She'd come to terms with solitude. She'd made peace with silence. But nothing in her years of stillness had prepared her for the weight now hanging from her shoulder. 3 lives, impossibly small, impossibly wild, entrusted to a woman who had never expected to be needed this way. She glanced over her shoulder, scanning the trees for any sign of the mother. Nothing. The forest stretched in all directions, pale and watchful. The bobcat had gone east, limping heavily. Maggie had seen the blood, the slowness. If she didn't reach her soon, she might collapse. Or worse. The trail was faint now, smudges where paws had dragged, interrupted by clumps of disturbed snow. Maggie pressed on, her steps slower, more cautious, not from fear, but reverence. This was no longer just a rescue, it was a handoff. The mother had trusted her, however briefly, with the most sacred thing any creature could give. Each step deeper into the trees heightened her awareness. A fallen branch, half buried in frost, resembled a claw. A flash of movement turned out to be only the wind stirring brittle leaves. But her ears remained alert, tuned not to danger but to something softer. The imagined rustle of fur through underbrush, a rasping breath too tired to hide. She adjusted the strap of the pack and held it tighter. "I'm coming," she whispered, not knowing whether the words were for the bobcat or the babies. Maybe both. And she kept walking into the hush and shadow of the forest, carrying the fragile weight of trust on her back. The clearing was hushed, wrapped in a kind of sacred stillness that muffled even the wind. Maggie stood just beyond the outcrop, her breath catching as she spotted the bobcat's mottled fur, blending almost seamlessly with the snow-dusted earth. The animal lay crumpled in a shallow depression beneath the rock ledge, ribs rising with each shallow breath, eyes closed. Her once tensed muscles now slackened into something perilously close to surrender. The wilderness took no prisoners, and Maggie could feel the shadow of that truth pressing on her like a weight. She moved slowly, reverently, like a pilgrim approaching a shrine. Setting the backpack down a few feet away, she unzipped it halfway, careful not to jostle the precious bundle inside. A faint stir, then a soft squeak. One of the kittens wriggled blindly in response to the cold air and the sudden nearness of something familiar. The bobcat's ear twitched. Maggie froze. Then, as if some ancient instinct had breached the veil of fatigue, the mother lifted her head. Her eyes opened, dull with exhaustion but still fiercely golden, and her nostrils flared as the scent of her young drifted across the space between them. Inch by inch, dragging her body across the snow, the bobcat crawled forward. Her paws left streaks of red behind, fresh, raw, but she did not stop. Her muzzle met the edge of the backpack, and she nudged it once, twice. Then her tongue emerged, rasping over the flannel that held her babies. A low, guttural purr rumbled from deep in her chest, weak but undeniable. Maggie watched, unmoving, tears thick in her eyes. This was not a scene meant for people. It felt like something primal, sacred, a creature of instinct and tooth and claw, choosing not violence, not flight, but communion. The bobcat didn't bare her fangs. She didn't retreat. Instead, she looked up. Their eyes met. In that gaze, there was no wildness, no fear, only understanding, an unspoken exchange of trust between two mothers, one of flesh, the other of heart. Maggie felt the world tilt slightly in that moment, realigning itself around something fragile and wordless. She stayed as the bobcat curled around her kittens, wrapping her tired body around theirs like a living shield. Over the days that followed, Maggie returned, never too close, always quiet. Raw meat left on a flat rock, water when the creeks froze, a watchful eye from a respectful distance. And then one morning, the backpack lay empty. Tracks led away into the forest. But as the sun crested the horizon, Maggie saw her, perched on a boulder, the bobcat watching her with calm, unblinking eyes. No sound, no movement, just presence. A final thank you, a final goodbye.